What is up, YouTube fam? Robbie C here, and today we want to show you how you can take your forehand from going like this to this. But before we dive in, we have to ask the most important question of the day. How you doing today, Taylor? You having a good one?
So catch me if I fall.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we are. It's forehand week. If you guys didn't see, on Tuesday, we dropped a video with Abby showing what it looks like to go from really having sort of no forehand at all to the basis of starting to get a forehand, getting a forehand that's at least functional while you're out there on the disc golf course. Now in November, we dropped a video talking about 5 things that I feel like if you can't throw 300 feet on a backhand, this is 5 things that are holding you back, and you guys really seem to enjoy that video and like that video. So what I wanted to do is put together a video that are 3 things that I think are most commonly holding people back from getting some bigger distance with their forehand. Let's talk about number 1. Now the first thing we want to talk about is grip, because how you grip the disc could change everything about how you are throwing the disc. The rest of your technique can very much be hindered, especially on a forehand, when it comes to how you're gripping the disc. I have a friend who, we've talked about it before, he can't throw any dummy discs on forehand, and it's because his grip physically doesn't allow him to. Now to be fair, he's gripping the disc out here, but this is what he's found works for his forehand right now, and he's not a power forehand player, but this has allowed him to have a functional forehand. And don't worry, we're gonna work on it. So I think of traditional grips, there are a couple different ways that you could grip the disc, but there's a pivotal piece that you have to focus on all of them, and then there's a pivotal mistake that I think lots of people are making. So your most common grips are gonna be something along the lines of a stack grip, where the fingers are stacked on one another, power grip, where the index finger is behind the middle finger and you are gripping for power, a split grip, which is traditionally used for upshots and a little more control, and the 1-finger grip, where you only have 1 finger on the rim of the disc in order to get more pop and consistent release. I'm sure there are other grips out there, but those are the most common ones that I see in doing lessons with folks across the world. Now, however you hold the disc, you have to understand this pivot point or this rotational spot. When we did the backhand video, we talked about how people are opening their hand at a certain time to time the release of the disc, and this is causing significantly less spin to be imparted upon the disc. So we fixed that with overthrows pinch drill, where you grip it with 1 finger and you're holding it here and it flies out of your hand. Then you grip it with 2 and you get used to the disc ripping out. On a forehand, usually it's easier to get your arm speed higher if you have any athletic background whatsoever, but the rotation and the spin is going to be significantly lower, because instead of having 1, 2, or 3, or even 4 points of contact of the disc ripping out of your hand, we only have 1, and it's going to be rotating off of that middle finger. Notice that I'm not going to highlight that one because that would really go against what we do here on the Robbie C channel. But we want everything to be rotating off of this point. So the drill that you can do to practice is to think about it rotating off of that point. This is a pivotal piece of whatever grip you're having, and obviously if you only have a 1-finger grip, it's rotating off of that index finger. So when you go to throw, it should be rotating off of this middle finger. When I go to spin the disc, I should be able to feel it coming off of that middle finger spot. This is a drill that you can practice over and over again, and you can see that it wants to launch off. I'm completely okay with it launching off of your finger like that, because that means that it got 1 solid rotation off of that middle finger point and flew off into the air. I do think when you're first practicing this drill, doing it with putters is actually a little easier than doing it with drivers, just because they're traditionally a little deeper. I'm doing it with a zone here, which is a shallow putter, but if you're struggling with this, step up to a wizard or a deeper putter, and this gets significantly easier to practice over and over again. It also allows you to get comfortable on your grip with forehanding putters and slower discs, because a lot of people who don't get used to practicing these deeper options, it gets really difficult for them to ever release the disc. But because you're going to be spinning it and getting practice with this rotation, it's really going to help you understand where the finger is involved in putting spin into the disc. But that takes us to our next point, which is I think that you're positioning your finger incorrectly in your grip. An issue that I see tons and tons and tons of people have with their forehands is that they have to have silly overstable discs for forehands, because they're coming through and they're chopping the disc and they're rolling their wrist and they're pulling it into the ground. And so these silly overstable discs allow them to fight out. The problem with this method is that it doesn't allow you to forehand understable discs, and you're probably never going to be able to forehand understable discs, because forehand discs just turn into rollers when they get yeeted over like that. But I don't think that it's inherently your issue of over rolling your wrist, because every single pro, no matter how good their forehand is, finishes sort of with their wrist down. Almost no one finishes with their palm all the way up, and that's because this is a very uncomfortable and unnatural position. So a mistake that so many people are making in how they grip the disc is over accenting their desire for power and that wrist roll that's happening, and a wrist roll with the wrong grip happening a half second too early could be the difference between you turning everything into a roller and getting a nice pop and consistent release out of the disc. So what are we talking about? We're gonna talk about, I should have looked up the scientific term for it, but on your finger, there is this lovely little pad that extends out there. Yeah, you see that little cute guy right there? Yeah. That pad is the secret to our forehand grip. And where we put that pad changes everything about how we're gonna release this Frisbee. Here are the two extremes that end up happening. The first extreme is that people put their finger all the way on the rim. They take this pad and they put it all the way on the rim. This is usually the case for folks who are pulling everything over to the left. If you are a power gripper and you're stacking the disc back like this, the temptation becomes very strong to do this, and especially if you're a one finger gripper, this gets very, very common for you to have that pad straight on the rim of the disc. What this means is that when you're going to inject power and spin, you can see that my wrist is already positioned in a somewhat down angle. So if I have any wrist roll whatsoever, I'm going to pull it, whoop, over to the left for a right-handed player. Now the other alternative is people are going to put their finger all the way on the rim. That pad is all the way on the rim. So they butt it up to the edge, but their finger is turned down. What this means is that my hand is now, instead of the other side where it's rotated to the side, my hand is very upwards focused, which means as I come through, if I want to pop it or keep the nose down on the disc, it's very hard to get this nose angle up. And so because I'd be skying everything, because it's naturally wanting to release that way, I'm going to focus on throwing down, which is then going to cause me to have a little more wrist roll naturally, and this motion creates the wrist roll as well. So you guessed it, we want to live right in the sweet spot. There is this lovely crevice between the flight plate and the rim, and we want that pad, that little cute pad on our finger, to rest perfectly between those. When we can focus on that, we get the best of both worlds. We can feel the power inject from the pull through with our wrist being in a more favorable position, so that if we subtly roll at all, especially if we subtly roll too early, we're not automatically turning it into a burned over shot. Simply where we place that pad of the finger could change everything about how the disc is fired, especially when we get to tip number 2. Tip 2 is quite simply, we should use the wrist. So often people get locked into a forehand and they lock up everything basically from the forearm down. So we end up arming the disc a lot because we come super high with the disc right here and we fire through, and this wrist stays static the whole way through trying to fire the disc. This creates an intense amount of wobble. It also creates as little spin as possible on the disc, and once again, if you don't have your grip right, you're probably pulling it straight into the ground because the wrist is never firing to add into the spin. Now, if you've ever watched my beginner's guide to a forehand tutorial, or even as we highlighted it in the video with Abby, involving that wrist is absolutely huge for getting spin on the shot. So often, if I want to throw a short up shot or something a little smoother and slower, I'm not actively trying to go with a huge arm swing and add power in that way. I'm simply coiling and cocking the wrist back and letting the wrist fire through so that you can see there is this pronounced hit point. And that hit point allows me to feel that rotational pop off of the middle finger that we talked about, in the same way that when I'm throwing a backhand and I come through to this point and the kinetic chain stops and boom, the disc rips out, that ripping out point comes from the wrist firing and the disc wants to pop out accordingly. I've got a basket located just on the other side of this tree across the road, and I want to throw 2 forehands to get out wide between these 2 trees up to the basket. On the first one, I'm going to not try to use my wrists at all. Now, I'm going to be honest, this is something I've been working on for years, and so because of that, it's very hard for me to think about that not firing. So I'm going to try to create as stiff a wrist as possible and just fire my hand and see what happens. I'm going with a pig here because I'm more confident in throwing pigs than I am zones, just from a time standpoint. So I'm going to give myself the more confident disc on the least confident throw to try to really balance out the scales. So here we go. You can see that I sent that as hard as I could. I pulled all the way back here and I followed through, and the disc ends up short. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try to shorten the reach back, but I'm gonna involve the wrist to focus on when I come through the shot, firing the wrist at the right time to send the disc forward. And we're gonna see, without trying to hopefully have to come all the way back like we did there. And boom, the disc is right next to the basket. You could see way less of a windup and a much more controlled shot. It never left its line, it stayed right there. And it also moved significantly faster than the full arm swing coming through with the pick. I also want to take a second to talk about Eagle McMahon, who had one of the best forehands in disc golf. One thing I appreciate about when Eagle does forehands is you can see him focus so actively on doing this, because this is something that if I forget to do on forehands, on short upshots is very easy because I'm thinking about leaving things a little fluid and coming through and snapping the hand. You can just see when I do this, my hand naturally gets into this bent position so that I can fire the shot. But when I'm trying to throw a longer distance shot, I have to actively remember to coil the gun, load the cannon, whatever verbiage you want to use to describe this motion. So I'm going to load the cannon. And what I appreciate is when Eagle does this, you can see him actively moving his disc back in his hand so that it's loaded like so as he's walking into the shot. He's very loaded with this disc all the way back here so that he can fire accordingly. This is something that if you're getting used to this method, you don't want to like push it so far back that you're causing strain on the inner part of your middle finger there, but you want to have it so it's loaded somewhat, because now my wrist has to fire. It's in this powerful position. And when I'm trying to throw for long distance, I'm going to be moving a little faster than normal. So not having to put in the guesswork of, oh, did I remember while I was moving fast to cock the wrist back while I was all the way back here? No, we don't need to. We can just simply load it ahead of time, come through the shot, fire. And speaking of firing, let's head in option number 3, because I think this is probably one of the biggest things that really inhibits people. Let me paint this situation for you. You wanted to throw a forehand. Opportunity has arisen. The backhand turnover, it ain't it. You're not ready for it. And you're like, hey, now's the time. Now's the time to step up and be that guy, be that player. And I'm gonna rip this forehand. And as you go to launch that forehand, it goes full skyrockets in flight, but there is no afternoon delight because it goes so high and it fades out so early and it goes so short of a distance. Sound familiar? Trust me, even when you feel comfortable on your forehand, you can still have shots like this. Oh, that was bad. So trust me, it happens, because mistake number 3 is one of the hardest things to remember constantly. But once you create this natural habit, it's going to start happening to you so much less. And that is leaning in, staying committed to the shot. When people get out there and start learning forehands, one of the biggest things they want to try to do is to isolate the entire right side of their body so that when they're firing the shot, their side is really shining here. So what this does is we create this backwards posture, lean into the shot, and we lean back, trying to throw so that we can sort of counterweight this like a seesaw type motion of everything fires back, and because everything has fired back, the hand can fire forward as fast as possible and really create this shot. Unfortunately, this does 2 things. 1, it makes it very difficult to not throw the disc crazy nose up. And 2, it puts a ton of strain on the oblique of the opposite side of wherever you're throwing the forehand. I've had 2 injuries in disc golf, and one of them came from over curling the wrist, trying to create power this way, which caused strain in the tendons in my elbow. And the other was when my first year of playing competitive tournaments, and I was a forehand dominant player, and I was coming through and I was firing this way. I was getting 450-foot forehands, but I was causing so much strain on my left oblique that I actually had to call my brother, who's a PT, before a tournament, because when I was warming up, every time I went to throw a forehand, I felt a sharp shooting pain in my left side. And so for that tournament, I actually ended up taking, because I knew that forehands were gonna have to happen, took a sweatshirt and tied it around that part of my body as tight as possible to try to put some pressure on those muscles, so that I could throw without as much pain during the process. I don't want that for you guys. So I want you to see this committed lean into the shot type throw. To give a better visualization of what I'm talking about on this lean back throw, and this is something that if you've thrown forehands and you find yourself struggling with that sky up approach like I've talked about, Have a friend video you. Have a friend be a tripod. I think so often when people video people, they want to see the results of the shot. Less concerned about the results of the shot, because with the right eye, you can just watch the throw and know exactly where it's going to go. So you ever film someone, you're ever doing that, unless you're filming from the back, you always want to make sure when you're, especially when you're doing a side view, stay as static as possible when you're filming, because that way the angles aren't changing, so that if you're following me with the shot and you come through, it makes things look a little distorted. Now, let's talk about that lean back. When I come through on a forehand, if I'm a lean backer, what happens is you can see my torso is starting to sort of shift back like so, and I'm leaning away from the shot because I'm trying so hard to stay back here with the disc so that I can rotationally isolate through to get this disc firing. What that's often going to look like is my footwork isn't actually probably going to be that bad. My footwork is going to be feet forward facing. Here I fire, but you can feel the difference in this shot, because as I'm winding up, when I go to pull back with the disc, even if I walk through the shot, I can feel the tension starting to build on that left oblique, or that opposite side oblique, because I'm leaning away from the shot to sort of open up this space right here so that the disc can fire through accordingly. Subconsciously, that's at least what it seems like is happening for lots of people. We open up that space so that I can fire into this. Now, how do we fix this? We stay above the disc. We stay over top of it. I don't want you over here in the opposite realm where you're like, that would be bad. This posture we're referring to is exactly why anyone coming from a baseball background, specifically people that played infield, are very good at. Because you'll watch as infielders field the ball, as they come up, their chest is over and centered, and so they're able to receive the ball, throw the shot. And from here, because their chest is far forward, their legs and everything can power into the shot for them to throw it. They're not throwing from third base whipping back like so, because there's not a lot of power there, and the power that is there is straining parts of the body that don't need to be strained. So what we want to focus on when we're throwing, and we really want to stay above the shot and really control that nose angle, because if we get the nose angle down, we're going to have a lot more consistency, is thinking about keeping the chest somewhat forward. I don't want it, once again, all the way forward. We're not trying to be Gollum trying to throw the one ring out 450 feet. We're leaning forward and we're over the shot, so that when we come through here, everything we can really push off of the back leg to fire the shot accordingly. You can see the difference in posture between leaning back here with coming through and leaning here. Now, I'll be the first to admit that in the example that I'm giving there, I'm probably even a little more forward than I actually end up on the legitimate throw. But I want you to be over exaggerating this, especially if you're in the lean back camp. I want you to feel like you're over exaggerating, because the reality is, if you feel like you're this far forward, the reality is you're probably just about where you need to be. Now, because this might help you get that nose angle a little more down and a little more flat, you need to be aware of this. And so we're gonna wanna aim maybe a little bit higher as we launch these shots. Not because we're trying to throw sky high, but the difference is between leaning back here and letting the disc air bounce, it's going to climb, versus throwing it unintentionally just a wee bit higher. You can see that I'm pushing this disc up and flat. So on the lean back method, we end up throwing, like I said, super sky high. It fades out, it doesn't go anywhere, and that's troublesome. But here we're gonna take the same mold, significantly more overstable, and try to get our posturing and our position right, and notice that we hopefully can throw it even farther. A disc that doesn't even want to go as far can go farther with the right body positioning. Took a significantly more overstable disc and added at least 50 feet of distance by simply coming through and pushing the shot. Where your chest goes is where your head's gonna be, and when that head starts leaning back, there goes your accuracy, there goes your nose angle. Put all three of these together and you put the finger in the right spot, that pad of the finger in the right spot. You coil the wrist back so that it's ready to fire, and you keep your chest over top of it. It becomes very possible to throw the disc significantly farther. So that's the end of forehand week. I hope that was helpful. I hope whether you were on Abby's end of the spectrum trying to get a forehand developed, or you have a forehand and you wondered why you can't really clear the 250 foot mark, this could be exactly that. So hope this was helpful. What tip of these stood out the most for you in terms of finding you that extra distance? What feels like it's going to make the most difference? And I'd love to know, what are your 3 favorite forehand discs in your bag? Please let me know in the comments down below. Look forward to seeing some options that others can consider to add to their bag. As always, I want to say thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Please make it fantastic for someone else too. But for now, we are going to leave you with the birdie.